The slap that cost him everything. I've replayed that moment maybe 1,000 times. The way the room went still, not quiet, still, like a held breath in a body that doesn't know yet whether it's hurt. The way the champagne glass in Harlan Voss's hand stopped moving. The way my cheek registered it before my brain did, a flat, open-palmed sound, not loud, not violent, just precise and thoughtless, the way a man swats at something he's already decided doesn't matter. And then the way Donovan Hale straightened his cufflink. He actually straightened his cufflink. Like punctuation. That's the part one keep coming back to. Not the slap. The cufflink. Let me back up. My name is Prescott Wayland. I know, sounds like a guy born into a leather chair somewhere, name already on a door. I wasn't. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, in a 2-bedroom house with my mother, Darlene, who worked dispatch for a regional trucking company for 19 years and never once described her life as hard. She just described it as hers. That distinction shaped me more than any finance class I ever sat through. I got a full scholarship to Ohio State. Double major, finance and accounting. Graduated with honors, which at Ohio State in the business school means you've probably missed a lot of Saturday afternoons other people spent doing things they'd be able to talk about later. I didn't mind. I had a plan, and plans require a kind of quiet that parties don't offer. I landed at Hale and Mercer Capital through 3 interview rounds, a skills assessment, and one genuinely nerve-wracking final conversation with the firm's head of talent who looked at my file and then looked at me and said, "You're not what I expected." I chose to take that as a compliment. The firm was old money dressed in modern glass. 42nd floor, downtown Chicago. The kind of place where the coffee machine cost more than my first car and everyone wore their confidence like a second suit jacket, always on, always pressed. Gerald Hale, the founder, was a man who built the firm from 3 employees and a borrowed conference room in 1987. He was 66 when I arrived, a little stiff, formal in the way that generation tends to be, but sharp, genuinely, quietly sharp. He asked questions that showed he'd actually read the material beforehand. He remembered things people told him. He once stopped by my desk on a random Tuesday afternoon and asked me to walk him through a risk flag I'd buried on page 9 of a portfolio summary, page 9, and when I did, he sat on the edge of the desk and listened without interrupting once. I liked Gerald Hale. I want to be clear about that, because what happened later could make it seem complicated. It wasn't. Gerald was a decent man caught between a firm he'd spent his life building and a son he'd spent his life protecting. His son was the problem. Donovan Hale was 34. 6'2", the jawline of someone who'd never had to develop a personality to compensate for anything, and the particular brand of confidence that comes not from achievement but from never having been told the two are different things. He'd been named senior partner 18 months before I arrived, a decision the board had apparently received with the careful neutrality of people who've learned which hills aren't worth dying on. He was not stupid. I want to be clear about that too. Stupid people are easier to manage. Donovan was smart enough to recognize talent in a room and threatened enough by it to make sure that talent never got comfortable. From my first week, I understood my position. I was there to produce work that could be attributed upward. That's not unusual, that's just how certain firms operate, especially at the junior level. What was unusual was the consistency of it. Donovan didn't just absorb credit as a habit, he did it with a kind of theatrical ease, like a man who'd been practicing the move so long he'd forgotten it was a move. He interrupted me in meetings without acknowledging he was doing it. He'd rephrase my analysis, slightly incorrectly, and present it to clients while I sat 3 chairs down. Once, in a room of 7 people, he looked directly past me while answering a question I had asked, like my voice had come from the wall. I sat with all of it. I adjusted my notes. I kept my face arranged in something neutral and professional, the kind of expression that cost me more energy than anyone in that room probably imagined. My desk neighbor, Reva Tran, was the only other junior analyst on the floor who saw all of it clearly. Riva was small, precise, and had the kind of observational intelligence that would have made her a terrifying poker player if she'd had any patience for cards. She'd catch my eye across the conference table during Donovan's performances and give me this almost imperceptible look, a compression of the lips, a slight tilt of the head, that said, "I see it, I'm counting it, and so should you." She was the one who kept me from leaving in month 3. We were outside a deli 2 blocks from the office, November cold coming off the lake, and I told her flat out I was thinking about putting in my notice. She unwrapped her sandwich and didn't look up. "Don't. Give me a reason. Because you understand things in that building that Donovan Hale never will, and he knows it, and that's exactly why he's doing what he's doing." She looked up then. "Threatened people escalate. And when they escalate, they make mistakes. You just have to still be in the room when it happens." I stood there in the cold and thought about that. Then I bought a coffee and went back upstairs. I'm glad I did. 4 months later, I found the thread that unraveled everything, and I found it, like most important things, by accident. I'd been assigned to a due diligence project on a potential acquisition, a wealth management firm out of Denver called Crestline Partners. Routine work. Review the financials, verify documentation, compile a risk summary for the senior team. I was one of 3 analysts on it, the only junior. Financial documents have a grammar of their own. Most people read for content. I read for rhythm, for the places where the rhythm breaks, where numbers that should flow in a straight line suddenly stutter. It's not something I can fully explain. It's just something I notice. What I found in Crestline's records wasn't dramatic. No missing millions, no fabricated accounts. It was a pattern in their advisory fee structures, 3 years of invoices that didn't quite map to their disclosed compensation model. The discrepancies were small individually. Collectively, they suggested that a portion of client fees had been redirected through a related party entity that wasn't disclosed in Crestline's filings. The kind of thing you'd miss if you were moving fast. The kind of thing you'd miss if someone senior had already told you the deal was clean. Donovan had signed off on the initial due diligence 7 weeks earlier. His assessment was in the file, 2 pages, thorough-looking. It hadn't flagged any of this. I ran my numbers 4 times over 2 days. Then I wrote a careful, detailed memo, no accusations, only findings, and requested a private meeting with Gerald Hale through his personal assistant, citing a due diligence matter I believed required direct attention. Gerald saw me that Friday. The meeting lasted 50 minutes. He read my memo twice, in silence, his reading glasses making him look older and somehow more formidable at the same time. He asked 10 questions. They were exactly the right 10 questions. I answered each one directly. When I was done, he took his glasses off and set them on the desk. "I'll need you to keep this between us while we look into it." "Of course. This was good work, Prescott." A pause. "Important work." I nodded. Went back downstairs. Ate my lunch. Said nothing to anyone. That was 4 months before the gala. I marked the date in my head and kept showing up every morning. The Hale and Mercer Annual Investor Gala was held every November at the Ashford Grand, 24th floor ballroom, floor-to-ceiling windows over the city, 300 guests who collectively managed enough capital to make the number sound fictional. It was the firm's signature event. Everyone who mattered attended. Gerald gave a toast. Donovan worked the room like he was campaigning for something. I was invited because my role had quietly shifted. 2 months after my meeting with Gerald, I'd been given a new title, Senior Analyst, Risk Intelligence, and access to project files I'd previously had to request individually. There was no announcement. My salary changed, my access changed, my position on the org chart changed. Donovan, as far as I could tell, had not been informed of any of it. He still treated me the same way. Which, honestly, told me everything I needed to know about how the next few months were going to go. Riva helped me get ready. Not in a fussy way, she just showed up at my apartment Saturday morning with a coffee and very direct opinions about my collar options. "You need to look like you've been in that room before," she said, holding up 2 shirts. "I have been in that room before." "I know. But look like you own having been there." She handed me the white one. I wore a charcoal canali suit I'd saved 3 months for, the white shirt, no tie, clean and sharp and deliberately understated. Riva said I looked like the kind of man who doesn't need the room to notice him first. I took that as the goal. The evening moved the way these evenings do, cocktails, introductions, the low current of deal-making dressed up as small talk. I worked the room carefully, said the right things to the right people, and stayed aware of where Donovan was the way you stay aware of weather. I was at the bar, waiting on a sparkling water, when he materialized beside me. Wayland. Not a greeting. An identification. Donovan. He was 2 drinks in. I could read it in the loosened jaw, the extra centimeter of space he took up. He looked at me sideways, the way a man does when he's deciding whether something is worth his time and has already decided it isn't. "You've been spending a lot of time in Gerald's calendar lately." "I work on things that require his input sometimes," I said evenly. He let the sound carry its own commentary. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you, because I think you're a capable guy and capable guys deserve directness." He said capable the way some people say adequate. Gerald has a soft spot for a certain kind of story. Scholarship, bootstraps, all that. It resonates with him personally. But don't mistake his sentiment for the firm's position. This is still a meritocracy. Access isn't the same as standing. I looked at him. I kept my voice very level. "I appreciate you being straight with me." He held my gaze a beat longer than necessary, long enough to make sure I understood who'd just given whom advice, and then he lifted his drink and moved toward a cluster of board members across the room. I exhaled once, slowly. I watched him cross the floor, watched the way the group opened to receive him, the way he expanded into the space like he'd been expected. 4 months, I thought. He couldn't hold it together 4 more months. What happened next? Harlan Voss, a senior board member, 22 years with the firm, the kind of institutional gravity that makes partners speak carefully, found me near the east wall and asked about the Crestline acquisition. He'd heard the deal had been quietly shelved and wanted to understand the rationale. I gave him a measured answer, careful, referencing only what was appropriate. Donovan arrived mid-conversation like a weather system. He'd caught his name near Crestline and come over with the posture of a man who has never once second-guessed his right to enter a room. "Harlan." He stepped between us smoothly. "I can take this one. Wayland's not really across the Crestline situation." Harlan Voss looked at me. The moment lasted maybe 3 seconds. Long enough. "Actually," I said, quietly, "the way you say something you've known for a long time and have simply been waiting to say, I filed the analysis that identified the structural issues in Crestline's compensation model. Gerald has the full documentation." He could speak to the specifics. The air in Donovan's face changed. Not dramatically, just a single degree of recalibration, the face of a man running a calculation that isn't coming out the way he expected. Harlan said, "That so?" And Donovan Hale, senior partner, Gerald's son, the man whose name was half the building, made the last bad decision of his career at Hale and Mercer Capital. His right hand came up. Open palm. Fast, reflexive, the motion of someone who has spent 34 years in rooms where the social contract protected him from the consequences of his own impulses. It landed on my left cheek. Not hard. Not violent. Just thoughtless. The sound was small. A single flat note in a room full of crystal and low music. And then, silence. Not the polite kind. The held breath kind. The kind where 6 people within earshot all make the same involuntary calculation at the same time. Donovan's hand dropped. His cufflink caught the light as he straightened his arm. He actually straightened his cufflink. I stood completely still. I let the moment exist exactly as it was, without rushing past it. I felt my cheek register the sting and I breathed once, slowly, through my nose. Harlan Voss set his glass down on a passing tray with the deliberate care of a man deciding something. And from 3 feet to my left, in a voice I had never once heard Gerald Hale raise in the years I'd worked for him, came a single word. Donovan. Not loud. Softer than loud. Which made it worse. I watched Donovan turn toward his father. I watched the color leave his face in stages, the forehead first, then the jaw, then something behind the eyes, the specific light that goes out when a person understands, all at once and too late, exactly where they are and exactly what they've done. I pressed 2 fingers to my cheek. I straightened my jacket. I said, to no one in particular, in the calmest voice I have ever produced, I'm fine. And I was. That was the thing. I genuinely was. What followed was not a single dramatic moment. It was a series of careful, documented, procedural ones, which is exactly how real consequences work, and exactly why they're more permanent than drama. In the elevator going down, I photographed my cheek in the mirror, a faint red mark, visible, time-stamped. I emailed it to myself before the doors opened. That same night, I filed a formal workplace complaint with HR. 2 pages, specific, factual, no editorializing. I included the photograph, the time, the location, the names of 6 witnesses. Riva, who had been standing 12 feet away, submitted a written account the following morning without me asking. Her statement was 4 paragraphs and read like a legal document. She told me later she'd gone home and written it immediately, while every detail was still precise. Gerald Hale met with me privately on Tuesday morning. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, not disheveled. Gerald was never disheveled, but tired in a structural way, the tiredness of someone confronting something they'd hoped to never have to confront. I owe you an apology, he said, on behalf of this firm. And personally. As his father. I'm not interested in an apology, I said. He looked up. I'm interested in what happens next. What happened next took 30 days to fully resolve, which felt long from the inside and will feel like nothing from the outside when I describe it now. Donovan resigned his partnership. The framing was, personal transition, a press statement so careful it was almost art. The journalist who'd attended the gala as Harlan Voss's guest did not run a story about the slap, too thin, too private, too legally careful a situation, but she did run a profile on the Crestline deal's collapse 3 weeks later that referenced anonymous sources describing a significant internal due diligence failure. The firm was named. Donovan's previous role was noted. The Crestline regulatory referral resolved the way those things do, slowly, expensively, without fanfare. The firm's legal exposure was contained, largely because my original memo created a paper trail showing the problem had been caught and escalated internally before the deal closed. Gerald's legal team made very sure that part of the story was known to the right people. 2 months after the gala, Gerald offered me a newly created position, Director of Risk Strategy. My own team. Meaningful budget. A salary that made me sit in my car in the parking garage for approximately 4 minutes before I could drive home. My mother cried when I told her. Not dramatically, Darlene Wayland does not do dramatic. She just got very quiet on the phone and then said, I always knew the patience was going to pay off, baby. I always knew. Riva took me to dinner and made me pay for it, which I had fully anticipated. People ask me, Riva asks me, because she's the only one who knows the whole shape of it, whether I feel anything about Donovan. Whether I feel sorry for him. Whether I feel angry. Whether I feel satisfied in the way revenge movies suggest you're supposed to feel satisfied, with the swelling music and the slow walk away from the explosion. Honestly, I feel clear. Donovan Hale was not a monster. He was a man who had never once been held accountable for the space he took up, and so he kept taking up more of it, and eventually he took up exactly the wrong amount in exactly the wrong room at exactly the wrong moment. He built his own ending. I just stayed in the building long enough to see it. What I feel mostly is something closer to relief. The specific relief of having carried something heavy for a long time and finally being allowed to set it down. I think about my mother working dispatch in Akron, 17 years, handling crisis after crisis in a calm voice because someone had to, because the trucks needed to move and the drivers needed guidance and the voice on the radio needed to sound like it knew what it was doing even when the roads were bad. I got that from her. That capacity to stay level when everything around you is pressure. I have a corner office now. Same floor, different room, better view. I keep the door open most days. There's a junior analyst who started 2 months ago, quiet kid, Tolliver, from Memphis, brilliant with numbers in a way he hasn't yet learned to trust. I've noticed him eating lunch alone at his desk with the door cracked, the exact half-open posture of someone who's not sure if they belong yet. Last Thursday I knocked on his doorframe. He looked up like the invitation might not actually be for him. "Sandwich run," I said. "You're coming." He blinked. Yeah. Come on." We walked 2 blocks in the cold, and I let him do most of the talking, about his background, his instincts, a pattern in a dataset he'd been puzzling over for a week. I asked him real questions and listened to the answers the way Gerald once listened to mine. Like what he said had actual weight, because it did. The rest, I figure, writes itself from there. It usually does. You just have to stay in the room long enough to see it happen. And you have to be patient enough, genuinely, strategically, quietly patient, to understand that the room always, eventually, shows you who it belongs to. Turns out, it belonged to me the whole time. I just had to wait for Donovan Hale to prove it.